Chapter 32, Acts of the Apostles. The book entitled The Acts of the Apostles does not much differ in its general character from other writings of the kind which were in circulation among the Christians of the 2nd century. There were Acts of the Apostles supposed to have been written by Lucius. There were the Acts of the Holy Apostles, Peter and Paul, the Acts of Peter and Andrew, the Acts of Philip, the Acts of Paul and Thesla, etc. The same bold appeal to the love of the marvelous, the same disregarded of historical facts and geographical and chronological accuracy, which are to be seen in those writings, characterize also the Acts of the Apostles. Gaza is spoken of as a deserted place, though at the time it was a flourishing city. In Acts 5:34-36, Gamaliel is represented as referring in a speech to Theudas, and to acts of his which were not performed until some 40 years after the time referred to, and more than 10 years after the time when Gamaliel was delivering his address. Again, the reference in the 21st chapter to the Egyptian impostor does not at all agree with the historical account of the same transaction as given by Josephus. There is the same loose reference in the prophecies as in John and Matthew. This work had but an indifferent standing among the fathers. As late as at the commencement of the 5th century, Chrysostom said, "This book is not so much as known to many. They know neither the book nor by whom it was written. The text has always been very uncertain. The Cambridge MS Codex Bezae has 600 interpolations. The author is supposed to have been the same as the compiler of the Gospel of Luke, a theory based upon the preface to each and which finds some confirmation in linguistic peculiarities and similarity of style. That it was written late in the 2nd century may be safely assumed. The following passage is from the writings of Aristides, the sophist, who flourished about AD 176. The similarity in style and incidents to the 27th chapter of Acts will be at once apparent. We were going to Cephallenia, and again we had a high sea and a contrary wind, and we were tossed up and down to the great detriment of my health and beyond what my constitution could bear. Afterward, the like happened in the straits of Achaia, when truly the good mariners would put out from Patrae at the very time of the equinox against my will and very much to my prejudice under my indispositions. The like things happened again in the Aegean Sea through the obstinacy of the master of the ship and of the mariners when they would sail through the wind, though the winds were contrary, nor would they hearken to me. So we were carried about to the tempest over the whole sea for 14 days and nights, and were oftentimes without food, and at length with difficulty got to Miletus. There is no reason to believe that Aristides had ever seen the Acts or any other book of the New Testament. That the Acts of the Apostles also was written in the interest of the Roman Catholic hierarchy must be obvious to anyone who will give the matter careful consideration. In the Acts, a prominence is given to Peter, not to be found elsewhere in the New Testament if we accept the two passages already spoken of. It was Peter who made a speech showing the necessity of selecting another apostle in the place of Judas. The Catholic historians add that he presided over the election of Matthias. It was Peter who made the great speech on the day of the Pentecost and who first preached to the Jews. It was he who first announced that the gospel was to go to the Gentiles. It was Peter whom Paul came to Jerusalem to see, and as Bossuet says, to study. It was Peter who was a prominent actor at, and as the Catholic historians have it, presided over the Council of Jerusalem. Peter is everywhere prominent, everywhere making speeches and directing the affairs of the church. He is the pillar apostle. of both Jews and Gentiles. Several of these accounts giving such prominence to Peter are in direct conflict with the writings of Paul. It was the policy of the author of the Acts, writing in the interest of the Catholic Church and aiming at unity of doctrine, to ignore the well-known differences that existed all through the early age of the Church between Peter and James and their Judaistic followers on the one hand, and Paul and the Gentile Christians on the other. Accordingly, in the Acts, Paul is represented as preaching to the Jews at Samaria and Jerusalem immediately after his conversion, although he himself distinctly informs us in the epistle to the Galatians that he preached to the Gentiles 17 years before preaching to the Jews at all. 3 years after his conversion, he went up to Jerusalem, but saw only Peter and James. 14 years afterwards, he went up by revelation and communicated to the Jews, even then privately at first, the gospel which he had been preaching among the Gentiles. In the Acts, not only does Paul preach at once to the Jews, but Peter becomes the apostle to the Gentiles. He is made to say, "Ye know how that a good while ago God made choice among us, that the Gentiles by my mouth should hear the word of the gospel and believe." Thus the distinction so much dwelt upon by Paul between himself and the apostle of the Gentiles of the uncircumcision, and Peter as the apostle of the Jews, the circumcision, is entirely broken down. Peter preaches to Gentiles and Jews, and Paul to the Jews and Gentiles. This is contrary to what is known of the history of the Christian church in the first century, and inconsistent with the declaration of Paul. The gospel of the uncircumcision was committed to me as the gospel of the circumcision was to Peter. For he that wrought effectually in Peter to the apostleship of the circumcision, the same was mighty in me towards the Gentiles. Even after the conference at Jerusalem, Paul was obliged to withstand Peter face to face at Antioch. Galatians 2:11. It is plain that the Acts of the Apostles was written in the highest interest of the Roman Catholic Church and in support of the tradition that the Church of Rome was founded by the joint labors of Peter and Paul. This tradition has no foundation except in the writings of one or two fathers of the latter part of the 2nd century, fathers who had in view the same general objective as the author of the Acts of the Apostles.